Talmud. In the Jerusalemite Talmud, they asked, what is the name of the Messiah? So the rabbis say, his name will be David. That's if he's from the living. But if he's from the dead, then he will be David. Not just have the name David. And the major commentaries there say that he will be David himself. David will rise from the dead and become the Messiah. It's a question. If, as David Berger says, that Messiah cannot be from the dead, how is it possible that a majority of the rabbis of that generation say that if he's from the dead, he will be David? David's been dead and buried at the time that they said it. He was dead and buried for 1,200 years. By now it's almost 2,900 years. And we still read the Jerusalemite Talmud. Are we supposed to believe that the rabbis of that century were Christians? They weren't. It's not Christianity. It is possible for Jews to believe that Messiah will die and be raised from the dead. Another proof is found in the Talmud in Sanhedrin 98b, and the discussion is whether Messiah is from the living or if he be from the dead. So there are those who argue on this point and try to squeeze out from the various commentaries that they really don't mean that Messiah could be from the dead. What they mean is if there's anyone from the dead that could be the example of Messiah, then he's going to be like Daniel. That, however, my dear friends, if you look at the language, I welcome you to look at the language, and today the Talmud is translated for all. It's Sanhedrin 98b. There's an Art Scroll translation. Of course, the Art Scroll people don't want to articulate the possibility that Messiah is from the dead, but if you take the simple meaning, it says he can be from the dead. And I will prove this to you from the discussion subsequent to that, almost at the bottom of the page of 98b. Rav Papa was one of the greatest students of that generation, one of the greatest sages of the generation, asks from his teacher Abaye, how can we say that we will seek out a different David, other than David, in the role of Messiah? How can someone be Messiah who's not King David? When it says in the prophet, he asked, the prophet in Kings, it says, and my servant David, Ezekiel, and my servant David will be the prince upon them forever. It says clearly, my servant David will be the prince upon them. So Rav Papa asks, that's talking about the future. This implies that David will be the Messiah. If David is going to be the Messiah, how could this be if David is already dead? He had been dead for 1,200 years by that time. What does Abaye answer him? Abaye, his teacher, could have said, Rav Papa, you're making a terrible error. This is a Christian concept. He doesn't answer him that way. He says instead that David indeed will rise from the dead, but he won't be the king. He will be a Nasi. He will be an important person. He will be the viceroy. Now I ask you a question. Wouldn't it have been simpler to just say, this can't be the meaning because Messiah can't be from the dead, and just leave it that way? And it just means that someone from the house of David will be the prince. Someone carrying his name. You see that from the answer of Abaye, Rav Papa's literal translation was not against Torah, and Abaye was answering him in kind, that indeed King David will rise, but he will not be the Messiah. And so you see that Abaye and Rav Papa, who were latter Amoraim, did not negate the possibility that Messiah could be from the dead, just that the evidence indicates that it won't be King David. And so, my dear friends, from both Talmuds, the Jerusalemite as well as the Babylonian, it is clear that Messiah can be risen from the dead. And there are those who want to say that Maimonides says that if he dies or he was killed, that he's not the Messiah. I just want to tell you that Maimonides is not talking about whether or not Messiah can be risen from the dead. Rather, Maimonides is addressing what became controversial in the Talmud. There was a ruling by a Rabbi Hillel. Rabbi Hillel wanted to say that there will no longer be a Messiah for Israel. Why? Because the king, Chizkiah in Hebrew, but is pronounced Hiskiah in English, was supposed to be the Messiah. And Messiah is a particular individual, and since he messed up, we lose it. That's his opinion. So Maimonides addresses this question and says he either was unsuccessful or he was killed. Why does he have to say he was killed? What difference does it make how he dies? But Maimonides wishes to point out to us the following. King Hiskiah was supposed to be the Messiah. He was supposed to be the chosen one. And he almost made it. He defeated all of the kings around him. In fact, the Assyrian king was the most powerful man on earth. Sanherib was decimated by the power of God in front of the gates of Jerusalem through the merit of King Hiskiah. And so King Hiskiah was extraordinarily successful. But he wasn't totally successful. And the reason was because he failed to issue a song of praise to God when that happened, when Sanherib died with his men. And therefore he was no longer declared fit to be the Messiah. So according to Rabbi Hillel, that's it. God wanted him. He messed up. Lose our chance. According to that, Messiah is a specific individual whom God has designated from the beginning of creation. So Maimonides wishes to disprove that concept, that Messiah is an individual. Rather, Messiah is a role of the king. Messiah is what a king must do. And every king of Israel a king from the house of David, must try to do that. His proof is that Hiskiah had a grandson, Josiah. And Josiah was killed in battle and was called the Messiah of the Lord, upon whom we said that we will live in his shadow amongst the nations. That's what Jeremiah said about Josiah. Calls him the anointed of the Lord, Mashiach Hashem. Now, if the anointed, the Messiah, cannot be after King Hiskiah, how is it that he calls him the Messiah of the Lord? Obviously, Maimonides concludes that Messiah is not an individual, but rather a role for all kings from the Davidic household. They are all Messiahs. They all are anointed. And they are supposed to bring about that which Messiah must do. And the one who will do that will be the one that God has talked about. And the proof of that is from the fact that he was called this, as Josiah was called this, prior to his being being killed by the Egyptians. But Maimonides does not address it. On the contrary, Maimonides in that very chapter, that very paragraph, when he criticizes Christianity, says that Christianity could not be the Messianic movement, for they, A, negated the commandments when the Messiah is supposed to strengthen the commandments. B, they weakened the worship in one God because they caused people to worship someone else other than God. They worship Jesus, not God. And they worship something else other than the Creator. C, in his days and through his efforts, Israel was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and Israel was exiled, and the Christian countries have taken their pound of flesh from the Jews over and over and over again, decimating the numbers of Jews that were here in the world. We were at one time 10% of the Roman Empire, about 4% of the world's population, and today we're less than 0.2% of the world's population. And that's a tremendous difference. Factor of 1/20. And all this happened primarily through Christian persecution.